Hi everyone, it's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 118. This is a pretty long one, so I'm going to get right into it without a huge amount of preamble. But I do want to let you know that in case this matters to anyone listening, there is a mild discussion of sexual assault with no details in kind of a building discussion about the various types of things that asexual people might deal with if we speak out. But the main thrust of this is centering around some stuff that happened a long time ago when I was part of a Huffington Post series where I talked a little bit about the asexual experience and discrimination. And so in one of my previous videos, I believe it was number 37, Letters to an Asexual number 37, was when I discussed one of the comments that I got on that series, which was published in Huffington Post Gay Voices section. And as you can imagine, that was just kind of a honeypot for lots of people, both inside and outside the LGBTQ plus community, to comment on asexuality in various positive and negative ways. And in that previous video, in number 37, was it 37? Yes, it was 37. I had talked about one of these comments, so I will reiterate some of the things that I said there so that you can have context for the next thing I'm going to talk about. And that is mostly, at least initially, focused on our behavior as activists or just as people in general who care about an issue, and our supposed obligation to be moderate and to center the majority and be very nice and make sure to coddle those people, or else essentially we deserve what we get, which is a very common refrain. And as you'll see as the discussion develops, I also go into some nuances about what some people call affirmative action or quotas. So let's go ahead and begin with the initial discussion that happened on Letters to an Asexual number 37. And this is what the person who commented in the comments of the HuffPost article had said. They wrote, "What's silly and pointless is trying to assert that a lack of orientation is an orientation." And I had replied with this: "Many people describe it as a sexual orientation of no versus no sexual orientation. That's okay though. A lot of people have a hard time processing it and have trouble accepting things outside their experience. It is, in fact, a position on relating to the world sexually, and it is, in fact, persecuted. Because no matter how you slice it, the dominant culture presses you to be straight and punishes you if you aren't. If it makes you feel more comfortable to say asexual people do not deserve your respect or resources because their problems are not perceived to be your problems. I kind of have no choice but to assume you're trying to exclude others because you don't believe or don't care that we are also hurt by heteronormative attitudes. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't imitate that heteronormative culture by telling us we're ridiculous for asking for respect for our orientation." So the subject of today's letter quoted my commentary about being hurt by heteronormative attitudes and had this to say: "I think you're making this sound way worse than it is. Whilst, yes, not being part of the 90% can lead to some mean behaviors coming your way, the society you and I live in is one that is generally accommodating of others within reasonable bounds. The particular comment you responded to seems like it's the result of a straight person feeling overwhelmed by the voices of other groups, such as asexuals shouting for acceptance, but also for the destruction of this heteronormativity, either actually expressed by said other groups or perceived as such by this person. I do believe that minority groups would not get such backlash if they were more moderate in their approach. If the pendulum is favoring straight people, others will generally attempt to reverse the motion, surpassing the equilibrium. Since the most extreme voices are the ones that sound the loudest and are heard the most, the favored group may respond in a not completely unfounded protective way of their position. When a vast majority is a certain way, calling that way normal seems reasonable. By responding to them that they behave in a heteronormative way, they could feel like you're attacking them. Or that very characteristic that is normal, as if it is wrong in some way. That being said, you do get a lot of resistance from straight people, but then heavy is the head that wears the crown. And if not the queen, you are certainly a princess. Luckily, you do seem to respond with reason instead of immediately dismissing ignorant statements. That is exactly what I think is needed in order to shorten the path to acceptance. However, your statement above does sound, to me, like it belongs to the category of those who wish to surpass the equilibrium. Even though I know you didn't mean for it to be that way. A rant every now and then is fine, though. Have a wonderful day. P.S. Not sorry for the long comment. In other words, it's your own fault if you shout too loud while protesting your own oppression, but I'm mostly one of the good ones. My response. I always think it's pretty bizarre when people say we need to be moderate and keep the majority comfortable before they'll accept us and not harass us or hurt us. Not talking about it at all doesn't work. Being nice about it still sometimes leads to refusal to listen, as I've found many, many, many times. Unless that person was already allying with us in appropriate ways and was just looking for information, putting the responsibility on us for the hate we receive and claiming it's because we're too aggressive ignores the reality. By saying that, you're saying that when we get hate, it's because we did something we shouldn't have. And that failure to be accepted by mainstream society is merely the result of not being patient enough, calm enough, quiet enough, restrained enough, and kind enough while engaging people who do not obey these rules. If they're hurting us first, and we're protesting that hurt, you should not say their negative, potentially violent reaction is just bound to happen like a force of nature. What we do to stop getting hurt should not be what's on trial here. Though obviously I agree that there are more and less constructive ways of dealing with negativity. Some people will not listen / not treat us well, no matter what we do. So there needs to be some of everything, including people responding to outrageous treatment with outrage. We are not attacking someone's heterosexuality if we attack heteronormativity. We are not trying to take it away from them. We are not asking them to be ashamed of themselves for being part of the majority. We just want them to stop acting like everything needs to resolve around their perspectives and their feelings must be coddled and considered at every turn, no matter how disgustingly they behave to us. If we ask them to examine and answer for why they feel entitled to behave in ways that discriminate against us, many would have us believe this is tantamount to attacking them or taking something away from them. Asking them to stop hurting us is not taking away their rights. And it's gross when they reframe it as if it is. Sometimes it does require outrage before people realize this is not a theoretical exercise or a waiting game we can afford to play. And if you're going to excuse a heteronormativity enforcing person for poor behavior and refusal to listen because we overwhelmed his poor sensibilities by talking about ourselves, I'm confused as to why the heck he is choosing to click on an article in HuffPost Gay Voices and literally invite perspectives on our lives just so he can tell us we have no reason to be talking. How can we be shoving it in people's faces if they are literally shoving it in their own face by seeking out the content? Incidentally, said HuffPost story had an entire section devoted to the very real dehumanization and discrimination asexual people can face and have faced. And I assure you, it isn't just some people don't believe it's a thing, and they mistake me for straight and it's annoying. There's a certain loss of safety and inability to participate in your own life if those around you are invested in you being normal. Especially when you grow up surrounded by such attitudes and come to the conclusion that you're broken, which is an incredibly common narrative for asexual people who find out there's actually a word for who they are. The weight of the status quo is tremendous, and it feels much heavier when it does not serve you. I hope you'll be willing to listen to the people it's affected when they say how crushing it is. And I hope you don't disbelieve us when we describe the violence, harassment, abuse, and risk of suicide many of us have experienced. If your main point is that I'm making it sound way worse than it is, I would like to know why you think you know how bad it is. I'm one of the fortunate ones myself, but when people tell me the terrible things they've experienced, I don't tell them it's not worth considering as an asexual experience because it's probably rare, probably atypical, or probably isn't as bad as they think. But even I, one of the lucky ones, once had a guy react to my description of asexuality by shoving himself against me and kissing me after I said no, then yelling after me that he was just trying to help me. When I fled, the fact that this is so familiar to so many people in this community is heartbreaking. I'm really disappointed to hear our experience minimized, as you're making it sound way worse than it is, when I've been partial to so many revolting stories of what's happened to people directly because they're asexual, from medical abuse to sustained domestic abuse and beyond. As for me, I am doing everything in my power to connect honest seekers with the information they want, and support my community as best I can, but the biggest impediment to my success is that some folks simply won't listen to me. I hope you will listen. This person returned and said this: "By no means should you keep the majority comfortable. I meant to say that the hate you get is often proportional to your degree of assertiveness or aggressiveness. That is not to say the hate, is justified, or that you did something wrong. It is not your fault that others can't seem to deal with you being a little different. You be you, and by all means do protest the hurt you get. You should not feel forced to sit idly by and accept any negativity you get. Some people will, indeed, not care how you protest, but I honestly believe a moderate approach generally works best. Asking heterosexuals to stop hurting you is not taking away their rights, but what certain non-heterosexuals call for and get is dangerously close. For example, the regional public broadcasting now has quota. There should be a minimum amount of non-heterosexuals and other minority groups featured in their media. To select people based on characteristics they have no control over seems unfair to others who do not possess such characteristics, even though that's a majority group that is virtually guaranteed representation. Yes, that special brand of people who will say you're shoving it in their faces because they cannot surf the internet without coming across something about asexuals. Silly. I do realize that you get some negativity from others just because they can't handle differences. Yes, oftentimes they'll just blindly hate anything that is not heterosexual, as if non-heteros are trying to invade and take over so they can ban heterosexuality or something. When I wrote that you're making it sound way worse than it is, what I really should have written is that you cannot legally be denied opportunities, whilst straight people can. See above. Which may be driving them to respond badly. Illegal discrimination is always possible, of course. This isn't a perfect world. My country was one of the first to legalize same-sex marriage, to give you some perspective as to why I thought of it. That doesn't take away that you can and probably will be treated badly because you are different, either in the USA or here. I do not wish to minimize your experiences, and should have phrased it differently. When I was a teen, it was made clear to me that I wouldn't be welcome to live with my parents anymore if I turned out to be attracted to other girls, or not be attracted to anyone and call it normal, for that matter. I really thought they wouldn't mind the latter as much, but testing the waters made it clear to me that assumption was wrong. When something so fundamental about you is a reason to hate you, I do believe you'll get hate and abuse. I'm sorry you have to endure it. I also apologize for a rather poor choice of words earlier. My response. Regarding the hate you get is proportional to what you dish out. I receive hate no matter what I do. Even if I'm just talking to people who are like me about my own experience and not mentioning the majority at all. When engaging with people who want to listen, the way they approach me is what determines how to respond to them. Most people who watch how I discuss this issue agree that I am far more patient than I should be. But even if I wasn't, I would refuse to acknowledge that I'm causing their violent responses because I responded poorly to what they did to me in the first place. How I react to being hurt should not be under question here. I don't feel that we should center non-asexual people's feelings in our asexual activism, and I don't believe terrible responses on their part should be attributed to the minority's activist efforts or engagement techniques. If the main point you wanted to make here was that some of the heat I endure would not happen if I changed the way I engage, I hear you and disagree. Though I understand you're not saying I deserve it. You're still suggesting I'm participating in causing it to happen to myself, though. Given that I am consistently, regularly, sometimes violently harassed because of my prominence in the community, and given that it sometimes comes when I haven't even said anything to them, I think this conversation thread is a massive derail. When I say the problem is that bigots are hurting my community, I do not expect to be told I need to distribute this message while prioritizing the feelings of people who share an orientation with the bigots. If it's not them who was doing it, I wasn't talking to them in the first place. Allies can learn to understand that we don't mean them if they're not acting like that, and they can choose to keep promoting our voices. But if they have to hashtag not all my group everything I say before they will be my group's allies, they are centering themselves in an issue that is not about them. Real allies do not put conditions on whether they treat me in a bigoted fashion. Regarding the regional public broadcasting now has a quota, please link me to their quota because I'd like to know what the percentage breakdowns are and what the categories look like. Appearance of characters on screen? Employees? Executives? However, it's phenomenal that establishing a quota, if that's what they're doing, is considered tantamount to taking opportunities away from straight people. If you know you otherwise get from 0 to 0.1% from a population when you don't have a quota, and you get a more realistic, diverse cast with a quota, that to me seems like making media more inclusive to reflect the world as it is, which is established to have a good effect on both people in those minorities and people who need to get used to seeing those minorities as part of their world. Not taking opportunities away from straight people who see those positions as theirs by default. The only way that asking media companies to meet a quota can be seen as punishing straight people is if you truly believe they would otherwise rightfully go to straight people, who deserve as a group to never, ever be asked to give up anything for the sake of their community, and never, ever be asked to stop viewing these slots as theirs being stolen. It's unfair to the straight people who don't have control over their characteristics. Sounds ludicrous to me, because non-straight people do not have control over their characteristics either. And we are absolutely, definitely being punished for that through lack of opportunities. When no conversation can be had and no change can be effected without straight people saying it punishes them, I always wonder who they think should be punished instead. And why they think what we're already facing and tolerating is acceptable. When quotas are actually established for something, they are historically far beneath the percentage that said population represents in society at large anyway. Calling it unfair to the majority, as if they should always have an equal chance to compete for every position, when by default the minorities do not have that equal chance, demonstrates a misunderstanding of what a quota is for. When a quota is established, it's generally recognizing that nothing but prejudice or ignorance accounts for the lack of a population in a field. When there is already so little representation, and people like us think certain fields, including media representation, just aren't for us, we tend not to try, expecting that we're not welcome. Deliberate inclusion helps for so many reasons. Even if it actually was unfair to straight people for some group to say, we want to have X number of non-straight people, I think that outweighs the disadvantages the non-straight groups are facing. I'm interested in hearing about the quotas, though. In my country, the number of LGBT people on TV is increasing, but it's still far, far, far below the actual percentage in the population. And on top of that, the LGBT characters keep being killed in their stories. Quote, you cannot legally be denied opportunities while straight people can. That's a baffling way to interpret that. If there is a quota that says we need X number of people who are X orientation, that is not the same as legally denying straight people opportunities. Especially since you can immediately look at whatever percentage is not part of that quota and conclude that straight people are free to apply for those. I'm really surprised to see it's legal to discriminate against straight people but not against non-straight people being framed as the takeaway here. If straight people already consistently walk away with more of the pie than their percentage in society indicates they would statistically have, it means there are forces at work to keep non-straight people out. Quotas help counter that. They should not be framed as legal discrimination against straight people. If you would like to know several legal ways that asexual people are still and have been discriminated against and hurt through mental and physical medical abuse, existing marriage consummation laws that can still be invoked in several U.S. states, immigration terms that can disproportionately affect us negatively, religious intolerance that's perfectly legal, a study that concluded that people are less likely to rent property to or hire asexual people, and documented adoption denials for asexual parents, I actually have a video on that. The related legal and legally supported ways asexual people are hurt are much less ubiquitous than the everyday prejudice, but there are many ways the legal system allows us to be hurt or left without protection. But you can't be legally discriminated against while straight people can, is a demonstrably false statement, and quotas are rarely legal documents anyway. They're guidelines, which when met can be touted as evidence of progressive attitudes and tolerance. But it is one that some will apply to turn the responsibility for our treatment in society squarely back on our own shoulders. I think what we need to do is move toward supporting people without demanding that we ourselves never have to give up anything. I hear far too much of, but if we listen to you here, we'll sometimes have to think about how our actions affect you. And we might even have to stop the things we're comfortable doing just because you're uncomfortable. It's really not asking for much when we request that people don't exploit systems and the status quo to hurt us. And if it hurts the majority's feelings to hear that they're hurting us, maybe they can learn to deal with a little unpleasantness on our behalf. That's certainly what we're asked and forced to do throughout our lives, after all. I think I've said enough, but I'm interested to hear what people have thought about this argument, and also if anybody has any insight into maybe their own experiences being told that they brought it on themselves for being aggressive or being outspoken about asexual activism or any other kind of activism that you might be involved in. The truth of the matter is, especially with some of the somewhat recent outcry over racial riots and whatnot, there's an awful lot of whatever that person did, that was wrong. You can't kneel at a football game, you can't have riots, you can't say something vaguely uncomfortable on the internet. Basically, there is no way to bring this into the majority's attention without someone saying, oh, that conduct is actually why you're experiencing this pushback in the first place. Like, as if it hasn't already gotten to a point where these people want to speak out about the treatment that they're receiving, as if that hasn't already caused them to come to a breaking point to want to do these things that are demonstrations or some way to mildly, temporarily inconvenience the majority population to be able to get media attention. But none of it is basically acceptable. Anything that they do and anything that we do is, whoa, 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 you're being so aggressive right now. This is why no one wants to listen to you. And even if it's phrased in a relatively moderate way, where the person, like the person I was talking to, says something like, I'm not saying you deserve it, this is still cloaking it in this respectability politics, suggesting that there is actually some appropriate way that we could approach this that would totally cause the majority to fold and treat us properly and really get it. And not only is it on us to find that way, but it's up to us to endure in the meantime and somehow get it universally accepted throughout whatever our organization, our country, our city, our whatever, before we can ever be allowed to even complain about it. So that's what I have to say about that, and I'm interested in hearing some experiences from all of you. Thanks for listening. See you next time.